All right, Nick, all
All
yours.
right. Sorry, I'm just trying to clear my screen and my mouse wasn't working. The got it wouldn't go away. There. Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our meeting for December of 2022. And for those of you who have never been to our December meetings before, we try to have an assortment of things that we bring up, things that our members have found during the year or run across, or that are worthy of discussion, but not necessarily a full meetings talk. And so it's our show and tell meeting. When we've had them in person, we've had large objects actually brought for the show and tell, including one of our members who was also on the board of a museum, bringing in some things borrowed from the museum. So it's been interesting. We've had coins, we've had pieces of art, we've had weapons, we've had maps, we've had documents, we've had rare books. And so tonight, since nobody had to take anything out in the rain, I'm hoping we'll have a few things of interest that are in your own home that you feel like talking about. So if you have the Zoom screen up, the little reaction thing lets you raise a hand. It's the leftmost, the thing that says raise hand. And you can let us know that you have something to share. And so we'll get started. I believe that Zach Foster has something to share with us because he just raised his hand.
I want to add one thing on there real quick, Nick, that
Oh, yes.
if you would like to be able to share your screen, that I will enable it for you. So just ask me and I'll turn it on. So otherwise, if you're just showing something on camera, that's fine. But if you need to share your screen, let me know and I'll set that up for you.
Sure, and you can adjust your view to speaker view if you want to see something that someone's holding up.
Alrighty, I'm gonna need a screen share for this one.
Absolutely.
Much obliged.
There you go.
Okay. One moment, let me give this permission. All right, tell you what, let's go ahead and let the next person go while I get this figured out. I didn't know I was gonna have to give Zoom permission. My mistake.
Okay. More of a security thing on his side on there for that. Anybody else care to share at the moment?
No, oh, okay. Yeah, Janet, go ahead.
I just wanted to give an announcement for those of you who may have been interested. We have been working for the past 6 months at least to try and enable a video recording of our meetings to be posted post-meeting so that those of you who can't attend the meetings in person can at least see it on our YouTube channel. I'm very thankful to report that one of our board members, Tina Miller, she and I and the people at the Blinn House have done a test this month on the video recordings. It looks like all systems are go. So we're going to be recording our January meeting. We're going to be able to post that to our YouTube channel. And if you want to go to our YouTube channel, it's listed on our website. You can go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel. That way you'll be notified as soon as those posts are made active, and you can be the first to participate in that. And I know David Richardson is very happy about that. You're making your hands clap. How can you do that, Dave?
That's one of the reaction things.
There's a reaction things in there for that.
That's pretty cool. So for those of you that have supported us through this whole process, I want to thank you for your patience. I want to thank Tina for the work that she's done to get us to this point. And hopefully we will be a full service Civil War Roundtable providing both video and in-person services of our meetings. So we'll look forward to that in the new year.
Terrific. Zach, have you got permissions back, or we need to move on to James? James, I think you were up next.
Yeah, James is up real quick. Sorry.
James, are you,
Yeah,
okay?
I've got it on a PowerPoint. Do I need to hit the share screen on my end?
Yeah, if you want to be able to share your screen, yes, please do go ahead and just click on the share button to be able to do that.
Okay. All right. Can you see my screen now?
It's coming up and we see it now. Yes.
Okay. I'm just going to leave it like that. I think you can see it. Anyway, I'm also a member of the Inland Empire Roundtable, and this story comes through their good graces. Mike, I see you're online tonight. But anyway, the Inland Empire Civil War Roundtable offers some help with genealogy if you have a family member or ancestor who was in the Civil War. So I had done quite a bit of work myself over the last 20 or 30 years, and but I thought, well, I'll give it a try. And Mark Radcliffe came up with something that I had never seen, and so that's what my share is about tonight. I'm going to go ahead here and see if we can. Okay, these two fellows here are one and the same. They're my great grandfather, Philo Sandifer. You can see him here on the left hand side of the screen, and when he was young. I think it was about 1860. I'm not sure. And then on the right hand side, you can see when he was an old man. I think that was around 1900. Anyway, that's what he looks like. The interesting thing is that, and I didn't know this, Mark came up with it, was this letter that you see on the left-hand side, which was written in 1865. And Philo had been in the Confederate Army. And apparently, I think he was wounded because family lore says he had a finger shot off at some point. And I'd always thought that because he was in Johnson's 10th Confederate Cavalry, that he had been on Morgan's raid, and that that's where he had been wounded and spent the entire war in a prison camp. But that apparently is not what happened. And I don't know if you can see the transcription on the right-hand side of that letter. It's very hard to read, so I transcribed it as best I could. Anyway, basically what happened is about 1863, in the early part of the year, probably, he returned home to Henderson, Kentucky, and spent the rest of the war there. I assume because of this having a finger shot off. I guess that was his wound and reason, although he may have had other reasons too. But anyway, in 1865, apparently the Union Army was going to try him for disloyal activities. And so that letter is basically from his friends and neighbors attesting to the fact that he hasn't been disloyal in the last 2 years. And I don't know if you can see that that letter, the transcription. I'll leave it up there for a little while so you can read it. But basically what it says is that he's conducted himself in a peaceful manner and hasn't been disloyal since the beginning of the war. And my assumption is that because the war essentially ended in a couple of months, April 1865 was when Lee surrendered, and the war was essentially over at that point. I'm assuming that this trial action didn't take place, or if it did, he didn't suffer from it, because I know he went on to live a long life, dying in 1915. But anyway, that's this is the next slide here is basically he enlisted in 1862, and he was probably wounded between 1862 and early 1863. And he returned home to Henderson, Kentucky. He remained there the remainder of the war. The rest of this is just what I've already told you. I can't think of anything else to add to this. Next year, I'm going to share another infamous ancestor of mine. I won't tell you too much about that right now, but that's basically it for me. Thank you.
There is a question for you, James.
Oh, okay.
It's asking how you found that letter.
I'm sorry?
Janet was asking how you found the letter.
Oh, Mark Radcliffe. Am I correct in that, Mike?
Yeah, Mark Radcliffe.
Radcliffe. Yeah, he's the secretary, or not the secretary, the treasurer of the Inland Empire Civil War Roundtable, and he offers to do genealogical research for people, and so I took him up on it. He found it on what's called Fold3, which I believe is part of Ancestry.com, and he found a bunch of enlistment papers too. It was a little confusing because Philo had a bunch of brothers and cousins, and you know, with the writing in the during the Civil War, well, even the handwriting today, some of those people got kind of mixed up. There was a Thomas H. Sandifer, and so that T looked like a P, and so it was a little confusing. But I don't think he deserted. I think he was wounded, and you know, just decided to stay at home after that. That's basically all I know about it.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, who's the next infamous Civil War ancestor?
His name is John Marion Jarrett, and he was actually Philo's brother-in-law. He was my great grandmother's half brother, but he was married to one of the younger girls, Josephine Younger. So he was also a brother-in-law of Cole Younger. And he became an outlaw after the Civil War. But I'll go into that next year. I haven't really finished the research on it.
That's great that we already have something to
look.
We already have something to look forward to for next year, Jim. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, James, your relative there, who's related to Cole Younger. It's interesting how 6 degrees of separation sometimes works, but and I've been trying to find it in all my collections, but I have a relative on my father's side who was in the Confederate with the last name of Long, and after the Civil War, he lived in Texas, and he took his 13-year-old daughter on a wagon trip back to Tennessee. And during the trip, there was 3 or 4 other people in this small wagon train. Well, they were held up by the Youngers.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
So I'm trying to find that. If I can, I'll get it out to you because I think that was impressive.
Well,
And James,
I can't find out which robberies my ancestor was involved in with the James gang. When I read about it, they say, well, it was probably so and so, but nothing concrete. What I do know is that in 1876, I say he gave it up, but maybe he didn't. But anyway, he moved to California from Missouri. And then he moved from California to Canada, where he died. And but in 1876, he was supposed to have died in a house fire, but I think it was a just a thing so he could escape with his family.
And James, there is a new question that has come in from Stephanie. Ask if Philo wrote or tells stories about his time in the 10th Cavalry.
That I don't know. He died in 1915, so obviously I didn't know him.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandmother, who was his daughter, she died before I was born also, so I never got to ask her. So I really don't know.
No stories or anything that he had written down though that were passed through the family?
The only thing that I ever heard was stuff that I thought was family lore. For
Ah,
example, this aunt who was the daughter of my grandmother, my aunt. She used to tell me that that Philo was at the Battle of Shiloh. Well, Philo didn't join until after the Battle of Shiloh, so I don't know how much of her information was correct, but she said he had a finger shot off,
mm,
and so I think that's probably fair. And then my father used to tell me that his father, who's not related to these other people, but on the other side, was named after Jesse James. His first name was Jesse, and the reason being that when he was a baby, his family sold horses to him. The other thing I know is that this outlaw guy, John Marion Jarrett, went to Henderson, Kentucky in 1876 to have, for the birth of one of his daughters. His daughters, he had two daughters, and one of them was born there in Henderson. But they ended up in Canada, in British Columbia, and apparently they disowned him for whatever reason. I don't know whether it's because of his outlaw activity or for other reasons, but anyway, that's all I know about it.
okay. So Zach said that he's ready to be able to share now. So James, if you could actually just stop sharing on your screen.
How do I
then,
do that?
if you move down to where you did the share, there's a stop sharing option in there. You'll see it at the bottom there.
Everything's at the top now, but I
Okay.
see the new, it says new share.
And you should see an option there to be able to stop share as well.
I see a pause share.
Okay, let's do it this way.
Oh, okay. I see stop share. It turned
Okay,
up.
great.
All right.
Okay. All right, Zach, it's all yours.
All righty, let's give this a try. Do. Okay, so tonight I'm going to tell you folks a little bit about California's Confederate sister cities, which are Mariposa and El Monte. Now, Mariposa is up, it's the gateway to Yosemite. It's the county up in the Sierra Nevadas that has Yosemite. This was discovered by Anglo-Americans in the 1851 Yosemite Indian War. Very sad story, very sad facts, but that's how Anglo-America came into possession of that resource that became a state park and later a national park. So on the left, you see a photo of Yosemite Valley from the 1860s. And on the right, you see a photo of folks hanging out at the El Monte Hotel in El Monte, California, down here in Los Angeles County. When a lot of people think of El Monte today, they think of lowriders and oldies, but the ethnic and cultural makeup that was prevalent in El Monte was very different in the 1860s. Yes, there were a lot of Hispanics in the area, but political control as far as the American system and the new California state government rested almost entirely with Democrats in that particular town. And even Los Angeles had a heavy Democratic presence. And during the war between the states, a lot of folks forget, a lot of people had been here in California for over a decade, but they were still transplants. There were almost no native Californians who were not Hispanic at that particular time. But this particular story begins a couple of years before the Civil War with a state militia company called the Mariposa Mounted Riflemen. They were founded in January and February of 1858 in anticipation of deployment to Utah. For those who might not remember, there was a Cold War going on in the Utah territory between the federal government on one side and the Latter-day Saints Church on the other side. They had gone out to Utah before that area was actually part of the United States. They went west of the Louisiana Purchase, and then the US border crossed them, and they were not happy about that. And then the Mountain Meadows massacre happened, and there was a lot of outrage in California. And to this day, the UC historians and the BYU historians don't agree. But the point is, that's where this militia company was created. However, they never got deployed, but they just kept drilling. The elected captain of this company was a native Virginian by the name of Benjamin Butler Harris. He came to Mariposa in the early 1850s. He blazed a trail across southern Arizona, for which he had a lot of great renown. He was deeply respected in his community. tried his hand at mining, but really he was successful as a lawyer. And then there was another gentleman who was a founding member of this militia company. His name was James Lawrence. He was a native New Yorker, but he was a Democrat by the time the Civil War started. So he sympathized heavily with the secessionists. Now, the makeup of politics and the Democratic Party changed very dramatically in California during the sectional crisis. California was a quote unquote free state, but what does that mean? According to the laws at that time, a free state was a state where residents could not legally own or possess slaves in that state. So with the fugitive slave law, which made a lot of concession to slaveholders, one way that a lot of people got around that is they did have their states, their slaves with them in California when they went for business trips or whatever it was. And as long as they did not stay the full year to get residency in California, they would go back to Mississippi, hang out there for 2 months, and then go back to California with their slaves and hang out there for 10 months. Now, in Northern California, pro-union Democrats or anti-slavery Democrats were in power in more places. Now, when we say anti-slavery Democrats, that does not mean that they were anti-slavery. It means they were against the expansion of slavery into new territories, or at least they supported the Stephen Douglas line, which was popular sovereignty. Let that state or territory's voters decide. But there was this faction some of you folks know about called the Chivalry, which was the Lecompton Democrats, the Southern Democrats. They were pro-slavery and they were in favor of the pro-slavery paramilitary groups during Bleeding Kansas. So one of the ways that the Chivalry Democrats concoct a scheme to get more political power is they team up with a lot of the politically disenfranchised ethnic Mexicans of Southern California. Southern California was very sparsely populated compared to the San Francisco Bay. They called them the cow counties. And before the Mexican War, the adult population of California was maybe 2,000. After the gold rush, it was about 100,000, and 98% of them were Anglo-Americans. So the Californios, they lost almost everything, especially their political power. If they made this deal with the Chivalry, which was kind of a deal with the devil, then they would at least be able to control, a big chunk of a state government. So they passed the PICO Act in the California state legislature, which divided the northern part of California into a free state and the Southern California into the slave state of Colorado. This did pass the legislature, but it was never enacted and it was never kicked up to Congress because it was interrupted by the sectional crisis. On the right, you see a map from the 1860 presidential election. And right here, this little green county below the bend in California, that's Mariposa. And this county went for John C. Breckinridge. They were Southern Democrats. Los Angeles went for Stephen Douglas, but it had its pro-secession parts. And then San Bernardino, which we're going to see some of in a moment, it narrowly went for Lincoln, but that's only because the Northern Democrats and the Southern Democrats were at each other's throats. Even going for Lincoln in that same election, the county elected a Northern Democrat to the state assembly. So the Democrats, I think, still control the area. They just had different loyalties. Now, the secession crisis comes, and this affects a lot of people in Mariposa County. First, Captain Butler of the Mariposa Mounted Riflemen, being a Virginian, resigns his commission in the California State Militia. He knows he's going to go back to the South. He just doesn't know how or when. The very next month, California State Assembly has its final session, and the Assembly passes a resolution against seceding from the Union. They were pro-Union. However, one of the guys who voted against staying in the Union was Mariposa County's assemblyman, a man by the name of Dan Showalter. Made his name as a gold miner in the county, was very deeply respected. They elected him to office. Even though he was born and raised in Pennsylvania, he was a Confederate sympathizer. And after the end of the session, he challenged a pro-Union Democrat, Charles Piercy, who was San Bernardino's assemblyman, to a duel. Showalter won. And what happens next? Around the time that Showalter is having his duel with Charles Piercy over whether California should secede from the Union or not, a state militia company from Los Angeles, they took off. They got mustered into the state militia, they got issued their weapons, and then they went off to join the Confederacy. You see a picture of two gentlemen here. The guy with the big old Grizzly Adams beard, that's Alonzo Ridley. He was the undersheriff of Los Angeles, and he was very strongly pro-Confederate. He was elected the company commander of the Los Angeles Mounted Rifles. A lot of their recruits were from El Monte, which, as I said, was Southern California's Confederate capital. And this here is a very dramatic
Oh.
artist rendering of Albert Sidney Johnston and the Los Angeles Mounted Rifles crossing the Mojave Desert. So that was their big claim to fame. This militia company got Albert Sidney Johnston and Louis Armistead from California safely to Confederate territory. But a lot of their recruits were from El Monte. And now there's 3 photos here. On the left is Benjamin Harris, who was the former commander of the Mariposa Mounted Riflemen. He disappears from Mariposa County late in 1861. He hung around for about 5 months after he resigned his commission. And then, according to my research, as I saw, in the middle of September 1861, his advertisements for his law firm stop appearing in the Mariposa Gazette. And then he disappears for about a year. He pops up again back in Virginia, but then he was transferred to the Texas troops because during his southwestern trip across Arizona, he learned Spanish. This right here is James Lawrence, who was one of the founding members of the Mariposa Mounted Riflemen. And this is a outdated photo of Assemblyman Dan Showalter from the 1850s. All 3 of these men were Mariposa men who, at the beginning of 1861, supported the Confederacy. Now, Holcomb Valley is the next part of our story. It is the valley in the San Bernardino Mountains that's immediately north of Big Bear Valley. It's the other side of the ridge. If any of you were ever involved in scouting, there's a big old Boy Scout camp there. This was the site where a gentleman named Bill Holcomb discovered the biggest gold vein in the history of San Bernardino County. So overnight between 1860 and 1861, there's a boomtown in Holcomb Valley with over 1,500 people, and a lot of them were Southern sympathizers, to the point where the Knights of the Golden Circle, which was a pro-Confederate secret society, they really liked imitating Masonic rituals, but they were very political and very pro-Confederacy, pro-slavery. They had rat lines by which they were sneaking people from Northern California, from the mining camps in the Sierras, down to the San Bernardino Mountains. And then from San Bernardino, they would either go to El Monte or they would immediately go into San Diego County to Temecula. And if they dared make the journey, they would cut across Arizona County, New Mexico to try to get to Texas, or they would go to Mexico and take the old overland stage route. But up in Holcomb Valley, there were so many members of the Knights of the Golden Circle and so many pro-Confederate Southerners from around the state congregated there at one time that they were actually giving each other militia training. So several times the San Bernardino Rangers, which was the local militia, and the Federal Army had to go send patrols to make people scatter, to break up these paramilitary camps. But throughout 1861 and early 1862, Holcomb Valley was a stopping point for people trying to hide on their way to escape back to Texas. So Ben Harris stopped there on his own, on his way down from Mariposa. And then in a separate trip, Assemblyman Dan Showalter and then James Lawrence, former member of the Mariposa Mounted Riflemen, they also stopped there. Ben Harris made it to Texas eventually, whereas the men of the Dan Showalter party, they were actually captured by the Federals, and they weren't Federal regulars. They were a mounted patrol from the 1st California Infantry. So this was the California Volunteers that captured these California Confederates while they were a little bit southeast of Temecula. When I say that Mariposa and El Monte were Confederate sister cities, of the 19 people traveling in the Showalter party, 10 of them came from Mariposa, and then 5 of them joined the party at El Monte. So they were captured, imprisoned. James Lawrence was broken by his experience being captured and imprisoned. He didn't even make it to the Confederate Army. So after he's released from Fort Yuma, he's going to go back to Mariposa County and spend the rest of the war up there. But Showalter was radicalized. He made a second attempt. This time he went down to Mexico, and that time he made it to Texas. And when he got to Texas, he was commissioned an officer in the Arizona Brigade, specifically the 4th Texas Cavalry Regiment of the Arizona Brigade, aka the 4th Texas Arizona. And because of the secessionist activities that were happening in Mariposa and San Bernardino in the mountains and in El Monte, all 3 of those areas were patrolled on a regular basis by the Federal Army for the rest of the war. And I was curious as to whether there was a connection between Bill Holcomb himself and some of these Confederates. Well, in this photo at the far left, you've got Bill Holcomb himself. And at the far right, you've got Benjamin Harris, the ex-Confederate from Mariposa. So there's a good chance that these guys knew each other before or during the war, before Ben Harris went back to California in the 1870s. And that is the end of the very abbreviated version of our story. If you want more Civil War stories that take place specifically in California and the Southwest, you can check out my YouTube channel, the Civil War Wild West Edition. And I will be very pleased to be giving a presentation to the roundtables in March, on March 14th. Mike Hoover invited me, and I was absolutely starving to take up that opportunity. So I'm excited about that. And I'm happy to share this PowerPoint if you guys want the references and the photos. So that is the story of the sister cities of Mariposa and El Monte.
Well, thank you very much, Jack, for sharing that. One quick comment on there for that. The opening slide that you had a picture of Yosemite Valley from the 1860s. I can tell you that almost certainly that photograph was not taken in the 1860s, probably later. And the reason I'm saying that is that it heavily featured a number of clouds, which from a photography standpoint wasn't really possible. It's very, very rare to be able to see clouds. And so that it's likely that that picture had to have been taken later. It still looks like an early photo, but just not from specifically the 1860s, just from a technology standpoint. So
it is entirely possible that the photo was taken later. I just went with the date that the CHS put in the file number.
I certainly understand that. I just was throwing that in because it was like, oh, wait a minute. You don't see, if you look at Civil War photos that are taken outdoors, you just don't see clouds in there for that reason. And so just comment on there for that. All right.
Occasionally you got they did do a double exposure of clouds with another scene.
Yes, but that particular one did not look like that it had that in there for that. You do see that in there. There was a couple of occasions during the Civil War that they did that. Okay, Mike is the next one that asked to share. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike and take it away.
First, my apologies. I'm a recent member of the CWRT last couple of years, but I didn't know what the process was in order to do this. So I don't have any professional product to send out there to you all. I do want to just let you know that I've been doing some research on my family tree, and I've got about 8 relatives that were in the Civil War. Almost all of them from Ohio, and I had one from Pennsylvania, but the latest one I got was the pension records for my one from Ohio, Richard Clark West, and he was with the 27th Ohio Volunteer Regiment and Company H. And I just highlighted a few things, but he was at 3 different battles, and they were all in Mississippi. Excuse me, 2 of them Mississippi and 1 in Tennessee. Iuka, Mississippi, with Major General William Rosecrans. Then he was at the Second Battle of Corinth, Mississippi, and then a battle called Parker's Crossroads in Tennessee. And this is not something that I normally hear in Civil War stories, and that's what captured my attention. He actually injured his foot while he was in winter encampment under Ulysses Grant, and he chopped his right toe, the big toe, and his next toe next to it off, and they had to amputate him. So that was during winter encampment in Corinth, Mississippi. And he was in for 2 years. He was volunteer. So I'm just starting to put the picture together for him, but I think that's the one that really captured me the most on someone getting wounded like that. But anyway, so thank you for the moment.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. And it looks like that Mike Hoover is next.
Yeah, let me see if I can get my screen up.
I hope I didn't jump in front of him.
Nope. You were first, Mike. You were the first Mike, and Mike Hoover is the second Mike.
Thank you.
Okay, I've just shared my screen, and I hope you can see it.
Yes,
It looks like there's 4 video presentations, and Zach Foster mentioned that he's going to present to the roundtable. Actually, it's March 14th, a Tuesday at 6:30, and it's going to be a presentation to the entire Alliance membership. So I'll be promoting that heavily. But in the meantime, I was just completely taken back by the quality of Zach's graphics and the knowledge that he imparted on these videos. These 4 particular videos are presently on the Inland Empire Civil War Roundtable's homepage, and each one of them is about 25 or 30 minutes. But if you start with the first one, part 1, it will really suck you into the development of the New Mexico-Arizona territory and the connection that a lot of Californians had with that. So if you want to wait till March 14th, I think Zach's going to be talking on Confederates, California Confederates, and expanding upon that. But in the meantime, if you just check out a couple of his presentations here, I forwarded these over to the Scottsdale Civil War Roundtable, and they were most appreciative of it, and they're looking into it too. So the Pasadena Civil War Roundtable has an amazing talent in Zach Foster, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So I'll stop my share.
Thank you. Appreciate
After
that,
the
Mike.
revolution, Mike gets to live.
So Janet, you are next.
I'm going to need to share my screen.
And you should be able to.
Here we go.
There we go.
Okay. There we are. This is a little bit of history for our own roundtable, as well as some history of one of the battles during the war. Pasadena Civil War Roundtable has sponsored a sign for the last couple of years through the Civil War trails. And in September 2020, our board voted to sponsor it. The cost is $200 a year. Our name does not appear on the sign because it would cost too much with sponsors going in and out and changing over the years. It costs too much for Civil War Trails to put new signage up for the sponsors. So it's it's nice to know, but if you it doesn't provide any publicity for us. So I wanted to provide a little publicity for us so that we could know where our $200 a year is going. The sign that we sponsored was for Lacey Spring, and it's a site in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. It was a small skirmish on December 21st, 1864, and it involved cavalry units for Custer representing the Union and Rosser, the Confederate. Both of them had attended West Point together. So that's one of the points that is made on the sign, that these were West Point comrades that later met during the war. Custer had to withdraw from this particular skirmish, and he had to abort his plans that he was going to march to Stanton. He lost 40 men captured, along with a few horses and camp equipment. And it was one of the smaller engagements that followed Philip Sheridan's defeats of Jubal Early in September, October 1864, the Battle of Cedar Creek. So this was one of the follow-ups that later occurred in the Shenandoah Valley. You'll see what the engagement itself looked like. You'll see the "You Are Here" is where our sign is. Let me go back a minute. This is where the sign is located. It's on the grounds of the Lacey Spring Elementary School. And in July of this year, I had the opportunity to be in the Shenandoah Valley for the conference of the Society for Women in the Civil War. So I made it a point to go visit our sign. So I'm able to tell you that it is well and standing, and that it's in a beautiful location. You can see the school bus in the background of that one picture there. But it's in a beautiful, bucolic location, and it does spell out the information about that particular battle, and it has the pictures of Custer and Rosser on the sign. Close to the sign here is the Lacey Spring Cemetery, which is just you go down this road here and up this one, and you can go to the cemetery. And so as long as I was close by, I'm a cemetery hound, and I like to visit old grave sites. And there were some beautiful ones in this particular Lacey Spring Cemetery. This one has some particularly beautiful craftsmanship on the carving. And I just thought that it was very artistic way to memorialize someone. You can see in the background, this is the elementary school where our sign is. And then this one I found was a nice little end to our presentation here. A quote given on the gravestone of Graves, family member, from Robert E. Lee. And so I'm proud to say that our money is going to a great cause to help memorialize battles in the Shenandoah Valley, to talk about little known Civil War encounters, and to help promote Civil War preservation in areas where people may not know that these lesser known battles happened, that we're helping to promote and preserve those. So thank you for the possibilities and the sponsorship that our Civil War Roundtable does for this particular area.
And there is a question for you, Janet. Fernando is asking, is there a link between Thomas Rosser and the film Alvarez Kelly?
That's one I do not know. You'll have to find that out for me. Fernando, you're the military history movie fan. I don't really know if it is portraying Alvarez Kelly.
Janet, I've got a question for you as well. Did the roundtable have a choice in selection of what they were sponsoring, or did you just take what was next on the list?
They gave us 3 sites and we put those out to the board, and Lacey Spring was one that we thought made sense. At the time, Margaret on our board was related. She mentioned that she had a relationship with the Lacey family, so she voted heavily for that one, and we just went along with it. But none of them were well-known battles or major sites. But every time the Civil War Roundtable puts out an appeal, they will have a certain number of signs where sponsors have either dropped off or gone on to sponsor other things. So we just knew that we wanted to sponsor a sign, and we could afford to do one a year, and we thought that might be a good one. But none of them are going to be close enough to California to go visit. So I wanted to give you a little virtual visit of our particular sign.
That's fantastic. And Nick is up next.
Yes. Being me, it had to be something related to a book. And in this particular case, it's a book that I helped save from oblivion, or at least this copy of it. Back in our auction at the October meeting, we had the auction of a couple of books written for children about the Civil War, but there was actually a more famous author who was known for writing Civil War historical fiction for boys in particular. And he wrote under the name Oliver Optic, which was one of those weird pseudonyms. His actual name was William Taylor Adams, and he was a politician, among other things. Well, he wasn't very successful as a writer under his own name. He wrote 2 novels for adults under his own name, and they both pretty much fizzled. But he wrote about 100 novels, mainly for boys, under Oliver Optic and various other pseudonyms. And the ones that had to do with the Civil War were all under the name Oliver Optic. And I'm going to hold one of them up to the camera and see if it will focus on this, because the image on the front cover has both the memorial medals of the Confederate veterans and the Grand Army of the Republic.
Yep, that looks good.
And what happened was the Pasadena Library, well over 100 years ago, had acquired copies of a lot of the Oliver Optic books at some point in time. These Civil War ones came out in the 1880s and 1890s. they were very popular in the 1880s and 1890s. Then people stopped reading him. One of the reasons for that was an ongoing feud between him and one of the other leading authors of the day, who was, in fact, well, this is one of those things that couldn't make up. He got into a literary argument with Louisa May Alcott, and it's because she accused him of using, you couldn't make this up, improbable characters, slang, and unlikely situations. He proceeded to point out in print in response that she, in fact, used slang, improbable characters, and improbable situations in her books. So what was she complaining about? And as it happens, most of the things written specifically for boys during that period really were the kind of thing that Oliver Optic was writing. They were adventure stories where the boy becomes the hero of the story, no matter how outrageous this is. One of the ones that Louisa May Alcott complained about was the boy midshipman becoming the hero who saves the ship in the raging storm at sea in the middle of the battle, kind of thing. And well, yeah, that's like, the boy has to be the hero, otherwise it's not as big a seller. His Civil War books were the same way. It was a tradition that carried on well into the 20th century with historical fiction written for mainly boys. Occasionally you'd have one written for girls, but weirdly enough, those were very different marketing things. And so the ones written for girls didn't have the girl being the hero who saved the battle or won the flag back from the enemy or things like that. Anyway, he wrote roughly 100 novels over the course of his career. And he was so dedicated to writing that the last of his books came out posthumously, because he was literally writing up until the week of his death. And his publisher had manuscripts to deal with for another, I think, 2 books that came out after his death. So if you ever want to look up the books of Oliver Optic, a few of them have been digitized onto the digital services like Gutenberg, but some of them are pretty much lost unless you stumble across a copy. You can find some of them at very reasonable prices because the popular ones were very, very common back when they came out. What happened was the library had a collection of books from the pre-modern library. So from the 1890s to 1920s, there was the old Pasadena Library near the corner of Walnut and Raymond. Some of the books from that collection were considered obsolete when the new library opened in 1927. And so they were basically put away in various nooks and crannies of the building, of which there were many. And there ended up being a growing historical children's literature collection that nobody knew what to do with. The Pasadena Library tried to give those to a children's literature archive, who said, well, we'll take them if you pay for the shipping of this massive amount of stuff. And so finally, what the library did was look for anything that was not especially valuable or especially rare and gave them to the friends of the library to sell at the library book sales. Because I was the one sorting the books through all this process, because my boss really wanted somebody who could pay attention to this, to sort them and evaluate them for value. I had sort of first dibs on the ones that the friends of the library ended up selling. And so I got 3 of the Oliver Optic Civil War books out of that collection and preserved them, because it's like, these have to go to a home where somebody at least knows what the heck they are. And the covers with their emblems of the 2 veteran organizations on them were the kind of thing that was going on in the 1880s and 1890s. The idea that they were on the same book cover is not something you saw every day even then. But for these stories, there they were, the blue and the gray. And I think he wrote a total of 12 books in 2 series of 6 for that. another series of nautical military adventures, and a whole bunch of other short series and a whole bunch of others that were just standalone books. The standalone books are the ones that didn't sell very well, and those are the ones that are very hard to find. But his Blue and the Gray series are actually relatively easy to find on eBay and on ABE books and places like that, where moderately rare but not hideously expensive books change hands regularly. So anyway, that's my report for tonight.
Thank you, Nick. Fernando actually has a comment on there for that. He said there's a Venezuelan soap opera inspired by Little Women, written by Louise May Alcott, and they actually used the Venezuelan Civil War, fought almost at the same time as ours, from 1859 to 1863. So, just interesting side note when you made the connection with Louise May Alcott there for that.
Great.
Edward, you are next.
Great. Hello, all. I think one of the fascinating things is to see the echoes of a war 160 plus years ago in modern United States. Early on in the pandemic, something occurred that maybe everybody knows about, but it's also the kind of thing that might have been overlooked. And that is that in May of 2020, a woman named Irene Triplett died. She was receiving a pension as a result of her father's service in the Civil War. Her father was Mose Triplett, a man from North Carolina who originally was in the Confederate Army. On his way with his unit to the Battle of Gettysburg, he fell ill, was put in a hospital, ran away from the hospital, I guess when he recovered, and ultimately joined the Union Army. He was part of a North Carolina unit within the Union Army. He had been born in 1846. After the war, he received a pension until his death in 1938. When he was 83 years old, he and the young wife that he had married the wife gave birth to a daughter, Irene. She was born in 1930 and she died in 2020. So 90 years on from her birth and 82 years after her father's death. And she was entitled to a monthly pension of 73 some odd dollars up until her death in 2020. I think it's amazing. Those two generations accounted for 1846 to 2020, 174 years. That's just a little bit of trivia that maybe kind of escaped notice during the pandemic. The other thing that I want to mention, and I'm going to hold a picture up and I hope it can be seen. I don't know if you can see that.
We can, yes.
Okay, that is a picture of a statue, that a monument that appears on the Gettysburg battlefield of Father William Corby. William Corby was the chaplain of the Irish Brigade. And on the second day of the Battle of Gettysburg, he was giving absolution to the troops. And the troops were all kneeling nearby. The Irish Brigade was largely made up of immigrants from Ireland, therefore largely Catholic. And Father Corby was with the Irish Brigade for basically the entire war. He had been a graduate of the University of Notre Dame, ordained a priest in 1860. The war began in 1861, and he was chaplain for the Irish Brigade. The Irish Brigade, by the way, named themselves the Fighting Irish. Years later, after the war, Father Corby became the president of the University of Notre Dame. And over a course of 15 years, he served a total of 10 years as president of the university. time went by, and in the 1890s, someone commissioned a painting of this event of Father Corby blessing the troops at Gettysburg. And in 1910, this statue was created, and it was placed on the field at Gettysburg where it is alleged that this blessing took place. Well, to honor Father Corby, the University of Notre Dame had named a building after him. So Corby Hall exists on the campus of Notre Dame. And a year after the Gettysburg Monument was placed, a replica of the monument was placed in front of Corby Hall on the campus of the University of Notre Dame, so in 1911. Well, again, I'll show you the photo. Notre Dame loves football, of course, and outside the University of Notre Dame Stadium, there's Touchdown Jesus. Well, you can see the expression of Father Corby. That is fair catch Corby, because of the signal that he is making that he can catch the punt and no one can tackle him. It's a football nickname, just like a football nickname is given to Jesus on the campus of the University of Notre Dame. And so there's that Civil War connection in 2022 for a man who was a chaplain during the Civil War. These are the kinds of trivia things that I just love. That's all.
There is a comment here from George, and it says, "Hi, Mr. Pearson. I wrote an article in our newsletter in Sacramento Civil War battle cry of Irene Triplett when she passed in 2020." So was she the last of the descendants from? I know that there had been some, and then it kept going down. I don't know if she was the last one.
She was, because somewhere my daughter found a chart which listed all of the survivors of various wars, or ones who might have been receiving a pension. And I think that there was one Civil War. There were like 46 Spanish-American War. And, you know, that was 2016. So maybe that 46 is down to, you know,
Right.
a dozen or something like that. But under the category of Civil War, there was just the one. So she was the last.
And if I remember, there were some issues with her. She had some issues with mental capacity or something that placed her in some type of special situation that caused this to be able to occur. Was that correct?
Yes, and that was a little confusing, because in some articles, it would make no mention of the fact that she had to qualify for a pension because of some disability.
Right.
It seemed it was an automatic, but in other articles, it did mention that because of some mental incapacity, she was able to receive the pension. Apparently, it happened very, very frequently that these old Civil War veterans in their 80s were marrying. This is the Depression time. They are marrying 30-year-old or 20-year-old females because it would supply some degree of financial security upon the death of the husbands. When they would die off, those young women would continue to receive the pension. That apparently was automatic. With Irene Triplett, it may not have been. It may have been because of some disability that she had.
Thank you. Anybody else care to share?
I had a comment on that because I actually did some research on it for another reason. Apparently, the widows were able to get the pensions automatically, but for the survivors, sometimes there was a question. If they were able-bodied and able to support themselves, they were not necessarily going to get a pension. In Irene Triplett's case, because she was disabled herself, and apparently it was determined fairly young, she got the survivor pension of a survivor not able to support themselves. So I think she was the last survivor pension, the last widow pension went to somebody who died right after her, because the last widow actually died in 2020 also.
Okay. Good stuff.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate that. So let me actually share a little bit. I've actually got one of my own that I wanted to be able to share. Let me share my screen here. For those of you that may have been aware for a number of years that I've had fascination with Civil War stereo cards, and I actually on our site we actually offer reproductions of cards. So we actually have hundreds of them that I've done over the years where I've restored and colorized the cards in here for that, and then you can go and see them here. I do collect them from time to time. They're very rare for the ones for the Civil War. In fact, the ones for the Civil War can go for several $100s a piece, where a stereo card from the period may only go for $1 or $2 for that. If they're from the Civil War, they actually are fairly rare. The reason I'm mentioning this is that I did manage to collect a few this year for that. Stephanie and I went to a 3D stereo convention in August, and I managed to come away with 3 souvenirs and a little bonus one in there for that. That wasn't what I was wanting to be able to share. Let's get the one I wanted to share. There we go. I came up with a couple of images in here for that. First one in there was an image of Grant, which was a terrific stereo card. I've seen the stereo card before, but the one here, I've seen it only as an image on the Library of Congress site, but the one that I'm sharing here is one that I purchased from them, and this one actually has a mistake that I didn't notice until after I purchased it. The image on the left and right hand side are actually backwards, and they're actually reversed, so you can't view it in stereo the way that it should be, because there was a mistake in it, which unfortunately doesn't add to the value. In my opinion, it subtracts from the value, but it's still a stereo image of Grant, which is something that I have wanted for a long time. So I was very grateful to be able to get that in there for that. There are some others here. If I can get this to advance, there we go. Let's move it along. Let me see if I can get it to move along there. Oops, let's try that again. Wouldn't it be just the luck? I'm the one today having the technical issues. There we go. The next one here is actually an interesting one that I've never seen this particular image before. This is an image that says that it is actually from Petersburg in Virginia. And they actually had this and another image that was part of the same series. And you can actually see some of the trees and some of the background there. You can see the same people. I've never seen this particular one ever before in there for that. So it's one that I was completely unknown. I wish that I had the opportunity to be able to purchase both of them. It was a little out of my price range to be able to do both. So I chose this one because I thought it was the better of the two, but I was actually very interested in both of those in there for that. And I kept the contact information, so I may go back to him at some point and see about purchasing the remaining, if he still has that one, to be able to keep those as a set, because I found that. And the final one that I found here was this one, which is an image of a Confederate dead in there at St. Petersburg, or at Petersburg, Virginia, in there for that. The reason that I had this one is that I have done colorizations of a number of them. I haven't done this one in there for that. However, that I did go out to the Library of Congress and I found that particular image in here. So if we go over here, here is the negative for that particular image. And then you can go in here and you can actually download it, which I have. I have this image downloaded. So I'm going to do the work and to be able to restore it and to be able to make an updated version. So I'll have my version of the stereo card to be able to go along with the one that that I purchased this summer in there for that. So those are what we purchased for that. And then actually, Stephanie, I got a little bonus while we were there. We managed to actually pick up COVID, and so when we came back from our stereo convention and we had our Civil War items in there for that, that we had to spend the next week or so in quarantine because of COVID. So that was fun. Anyway, who else would like to be able to share here?
Austin has his hand up.
Austin, put you in the spotlight. There you go.
Yes, perfect. All right, thank you, David. I saw a really interesting thing in that last picture you shared. It's really striking to me, from Petersburg, the Confederate soldier who's dead in the trench.
Right.
On the side there, it says "War for the Union," and
Yes.
it's so striking to me the cost of the war and how that was towards the end. Of course, that was the final months of the war. Actually, I think if I'm not mistaken, was that the trying to remember the name of the photographer, not Brady, but the other. He's the other really big photographer from the war, and he took
Gardner.
pictures. Yeah,
No.
Alexander Gardner. Yeah,
No.
that
No.
wasn't Gardner's.
No. So I did actually take the images of the back of this on there for that, and let me.
O'Sullivan.
No, this is I'll show you who it is. So let me share my screen again here. See where my controls are to be able to do that. And I lost my controls here.
It's a striking photo because it says "War for the Union," so bold, and it shows dead soldier instead of the grand parade at Washington, and it's more of a striking image, like a somber image.
The ones there that say "War for the Union" for that was actually a series that was done in there for that, and that one was actually done. Let me go ahead and bring it up. I have it here now. There it is. This is the company that did it. ENHT Anthony in there for that. They actually did the War of the Union series in there for that. So that was actually a series they did from the Civil War to be able to do that, and it was a very common thing to be able to. I'm sorry, the War for the Union wasn't just something they put at the end of the war in there for that. That was actually throughout the entire Civil War. In fact, you can tell from the images what period the image was produced in. So the ones with the orange border, these were actually ones that were done on the 25th anniversary. So these were ones from about 1890s to 1910, and in there for that, they were around that time frame. And the ones that with the yellow border, those were the actually ones done during the Civil War. And they still say the War for the Union, but they're a little more prominent in there for that. But those are actually much more collectible than these are, but these are considered first period in there for that one as well.
Wow, thank you, David. Well, happy holidays to everybody. I hope everybody had a good holiday season. Looking forward to the new year. So I'm excited for next month's meeting. So I was figuring out what to share tonight, and I realized I have way too much stuff on Jefferson Davis. I have a lot. I was like, I'm going to share this. I'm going to share this. So I just got a couple of things to share, and then they're kind of all related to each other. It's all Jefferson Davis. Well, there's kind of a funny thing here. I forgot I had this guy. He's on my mantle over here, and he is a collectible, a plush collectible Creation Station Jefferson Davis. And he's got the rise and fall of the Confederate government right here in his hand, and the stand that comes with it. And I kept the tag on it, of course, but I found this guy on eBay. An old lady was selling on eBay for $5. So I said, yeah, I'm going to jump on it. So, but the main funny stuff you can find on eBay, but the main course that I want to show, and this is another thing I found off eBay about a month before it was taken down in Richmond, before the George Floyd protests and everything that happened in June of 2020. I managed to score, and this is the only one I've ever seen, an artist in Richmond by the name of Dan Booten, supposedly made out of lead. He made replicas of statues on Monument Avenue, and this one is the one of the Jefferson Davis Monument in Richmond, and it's supposed to be the first one out of 1,000, but I've never seen the other 999. So I don't know if he commissioned other ones but I looked it up on eBay one day, and this was for sale on eBay, and there was another seller on eBay who was, or another bidder on eBay who was really fighting with me over it. And I looked up information about it. I couldn't find anything about it. Someone back in Richmond who sells lamps had it auctioned, and they didn't have anything else but the Civil War listed. And myself and this bidder went back and forth. We fought and fought and fought, and finally I was able to win it. But I learned a big lesson with eBay: never bid early on, because then the other person is just going to say, you know what, I'm going to bid $10 more than you, and then 20, and then they're going to start putting reserves. And yeah, don't bid early. That's my lesson from that. But that was kind of interesting because it was a month that was during the lockdown, and my mom and I went up to up by Gilroy, and she had won a little stool during the lockdown. We were doing a lot of like shopping on eBay because it was just kind of a fun way to kill time when I was laid off of work. And we went up to Gilroy and we picked up a stool that we found that one of our family ancestors may have made back in North Carolina out of wood on eBay. And during that trip, I kept bidding on this statue saying, I'm not going to be outbid by this other person. But it's funny how just a month later, it was torn down in the streets of Richmond because of what happened with everything. I thought, wow, the timing is crazy. And then over time, I just got more and more attached with this monument because of its history. And I really started researching it more. And I managed to get one of the reunion medals from the 1907 dedication of the monument, UCV medal. And I keep that in my curio. And then they gave out little flags for 50 cents. They gave out little flags that they would have at the ceremony to veterans who arrived via the Southern Railway. They had tickets on the Southern Railway. They gave these to them, and they put them inside their tickets, and it was just supposed to be kind of a thing they could take with them to take home. So that's also from 1907. And then the actual ticket itself from the Southern Railway, I have it preserved here. And this is what it looks like. The battlefields of Virginia. I'm trying to get a good view of it. But yeah, they were able to, that's what they kept their tickets inside of. And then the program is here. And that was the year it was dedicated in 1907, June 1907, for the monument on Monument Avenue. And then, of course, it took about 15 years for the monument to be dedicated. They had big grand plans. They wanted to make a monument that rivaled Grant's tomb, and it just never worked out. It was too expensive. It was going to cost $200 and something thousand, and the UDC, Ladies Memorial Association, which then they merged to become the UDC, they didn't have the money for it, so then they scaled it way down. And then they came up with, of course, what used to be standing, the Valentine sculpture, which that's my picture of it from 2018 that I took when I went back to Richmond, of the Jefferson Davis Monument. It was quite a monument. It was a very pretty monument. That's what it looked like, of course. I get a good view. And that's my mom in the corner, so kind of to scale. So it was a big monument. And then last but not least, I really love how online, if you find like old books and old, I hate touching old books because I get so scared I'm going to destroy them. So I like to have like facsimiles made of them, like copies made of them. And of course, there's websites online you can go to. And if you find something through the Library of Congress, you can send them the catalog. And for a few dollars, they'll have it printed for you. And I managed to get the entire catalog from the Memorial Association that put that monument in 1907 made into book format. So I'm able to read it. I don't have to worry about damaging it. It lists all the people who sponsored it, all the history behind the monument. And it's just kind of a nice thing. And then, of course, the dedication services lasted 5 days. So it was quite hundreds of thousands of people came to Richmond that year to see the dedication of this monument. It'd only been, 18 years after Jefferson Davis died. So it was quite a spectacle. So just thought I would share that. It's probably, if there's such thing as having your favorite monument, like post-war monument, is probably mine because of just all the history and everything that's behind it. So yeah, thank you.
So Jen is asking a question if when the monument was taken down, if it was relocated or if it was stored.
So that's really interesting. It was taken down. So what happened is, everything happened with George Floyd in Minnesota. And then we started seeing, vandalism. We started seeing mass protests, and Richmond especially had a lot of people were very upset in Richmond. They burned part of the UDC library in Richmond on Arthur Ashe Boulevard. They vandalized the Jeb Stuart Monument, but the Jefferson Davis Monument probably got hit the worst. And of course, we all know about the Lee Monument, but the Davis Monument got hit really hard. It had been up for a few days after Floyd was murdered. And then one night protesters went and they pulled down the statue part of Davis. And they had put a basketball hoop or something above where it used to be. But they tore it down, and then police cleared the intersection and they hauled the statue away. It had fallen on the ground. There's pictures of it on the ground. If you look at the Richmond Times-Dispatch newspaper, they went and took pictures of it before it was hauled away by the police. Then the monument was turned over to the Valentine Museum in Richmond, and they kept it in storage for a couple of years. And the really interesting thing for all of us that live here in Los Angeles is this coming fall is going to be a traveling exhibit. It's called, you can look it up online. I think it's called Monuments, like X Monuments or something like that. And down in Los Angeles, the Contemporary Art Museum is going to be hosting monuments that are owned by the Valentine Museum. And one of them is going to be the Jefferson Davis Monument. They're going to transport it out here to Los Angeles where it's going to be on exhibit for a season. So I plan on going down to that. It's going to, not going to lie, it's probably going to hurt a little bit, but it's going to be interesting to see because they kept it as it was when it was vandalized that night. And then the rest of the monument, there was a big facade that was around it, 13 columns for the 13 states. There was a big column behind Davis. It had a statue called Vindicatrix on the top of it. It was an angel appealing to heaven. There's plaques for the Confederate Navy and the Confederate armies that were flanking Davis. All of those were taken down, I think, just a few months ago. So it's a big concrete slab now in the middle of that intersection of Richmond. But the city of Richmond controls the rest of the monument. But the statue's in the possession of the Valentine Museum in Richmond. So it's supposed to come out here this coming year for an exhibit here in LA.
Be interesting to see that. And
yeah, the changing culture
Right,
around landscapes and monuments, and yeah.
When you mentioned purchasing stuff on eBay, it reminded me of just a story there about that we offer our stuff for sale on eBay and Amazon in there for that. eBay has never been a problem, but occasionally that I do have problems with Amazon. They actually removed all of my listings at one point that had the word Confederate in there. So I would say Robert Lee, a general of the Confederate Army, and anything that had the word Confederate, they struck all of my listings completely. So I had to remove them. So now my listings that are on there, that he is listed as the general of the Southern Army, because that was acceptable. But if I put the word Confederate, they wouldn't allow it. The other one that I found really amusing, and this has happened a couple of times on the same image on there for that I have an image of the exterior of Ford's Theater, actually the interior and the exterior of Ford's Theater, and I've had it happen on both in there for that. So it's been struck for copyright because I don't own the copyright to Ford Motor Company, and that my image of Ford's Theater violates Ford Motor Company's copyright ownership of the word Ford, and that I have to prove my copyright. So they will bring my image down and they will withhold it. What's interesting is that I have 2 or 3 different versions of the image from different viewpoints in there for that. And whenever they do it, they always only strike one of them in there for that. So the others are still there, but I have to go and fight to be able to get it back. And I always make the same argument to them in there for that. So the argument that I make to them is that if I went to the rainforest in South America and I took a picture of the Amazon and I posted a picture of the Amazon that I took, would that violate Amazon's right to the word copyright of the word Amazon in there for that? So ultimately they end up giving it back to me and restoring my right to be able to sell the image, because that somehow that somebody, it takes 3 or 4 weeks every time to be able to do it. But I find it really annoying and really frustrating that I have to fight over the copyright for and I can't imagine that it's Ford Motor Company that's trying to be able to lay claim to that particular image. But anyway.
And honestly too, you're talking about Amazon. I've had bad luck lately with eBay. It's kind of funny that statue made it like it did. It was kind of funny because that statue, I wanted it sent by ground because less people were handling it. I used to work at UPS and it was a disaster this time of year. Right. When I ordered that statue, even though I ordered it in the middle of spring or something, I was so worried about getting wrecked that I wanted to be sent by ground because it'd be one truck. I think it came from Indiana or someplace. Right. And it's kind of funny because it was like Davis was taking a tour of the United States, because every time it went through a hub, it was scanned as it went through. So one night it was in Indiana, next night it was in Illinois, going through the Union. But this month I've had a little bit of bad luck. It's kind of a bummer with like eBay, because I actually had 2 statues from 1905. They were made really pretty statues. They're like a plaster. And the seller on eBay, he didn't really typically sell this kind of stuff, so I maybe should have been more careful with that. But he didn't say, the seller didn't list what the statues were made out of, but UPS dropped off the package about 4 or 5 days ago. It was going to be a gift for my family, and that was the result. I don't know if you guys can see.
Oh, no.
Completely smashed. The package was torn open. There was a boot print on it. Yeah. Be very careful ordering stuff, you know. And then I had a print of Lee and Jackson, a lost cause print. You know, it was one of the original prints. It was a proof. And I hadn't seen one since I went to the Museum of the Confederacy in 2018. And it was also delivered by UPS about 7-8 months ago. And it was right in the middle, glass that smashed it and punched a hole right through it. Yeah. I've had bad luck with UPS.
Unfortunate.
Yeah. Just always beware.
Bad packaging too.
Yeah. Bad packaging. Yep. Sellers, if they don't know what they're doing or if they don't package enough or they're trying to be cheap. But those statues I spent $160 in shipping for.
Wow.
Wow.
I hope you can get a claim for those.
I did. I got a claim for it. UPS is so slammed right now with everything. They just automatically issued from the claims department damages. They said they told eBay just issue out the insurance. So I still have them in my back room. I'm gonna try to fix them, but yeah, it's pretty, sand was coming out of them. It was bad. So hopefully I can get them fixed. They were 2 feet tall. They were really pretty statues in person. So hopefully I can fix them.
It's
Just
unfortunate.
piggybacking off of what Dave said real quick about getting copyrighted over Ford's Theater. I had a horror experience with YouTube about 3 months ago. I got a copyright flag from Warner Music Group because one of my videos had the track Just Before the Battle Mother. Apparently, one of their Civil War documentaries included that track in the soundtrack. So I had to argue with the YouTube copyright branch that the whole CD is copyrighted, but that particular track, which is on the UCSB Cylinder Archive, is public domain. So respectfully, kiss my tush. And I won that one, luckily, but it was still a lame experience to go through.
That's really annoying for that. All right, Mike has his hand up, so I'm going to turn it over to Mike.
Yeah, just 2 things if I can to piggyback onto Austin. Last Christmas, I bought for a couple of young children I know a Civil War miniature soldier toy set. And when it came, and of course, in the description, there was a little asterisk there because it had the American flag. And then it said, you know, we will not ship this with a Confederate flag. We will replace it with just a red flag instead. So sign of our times for little kids. If you want, I have about a 3-minute video. This summer, I went back on an extended Civil War road trip, and I took 42 videos while I was there. And one of them, I realized after I was at Gettysburg the first time, I had a great grand uncle who served in the North Carolina 23rd, and he was at Iverson's brigade in Gettysburg. And prior to that, he was at South Mountain in Rhodes Division, and I was taken prisoner, and then he was exchanged. So he ended up at Gettysburg. And I found out he was my great grand uncle. And there's an amazing story. So I had to put an end to the book on him. He was eventually declared insane after he was taken prisoner and held for 11 months down at Fort Jefferson in the Dry Tortugas. And they sent him up to Charity Hospital in 1865 in New Orleans. He would have been about 24. And I didn't find him again until 1900. And he's at the insane asylum in Louisiana. And fortunately, that mental hospital is still there on the same grounds. So I was able to go back and visit probably the cemetery where he's buried in an open grave. The only thing I don't know and can't find yet after an extensive search is the day he died. But, you know, that's not really as important. He would have been about 60 then. But I've got a video I'd like to share of that particular battlefield, if I can.
You should be able to share it.
Yeah, let me see. Okay, can you see the start of that video?
Yes.
Okay, that's taken from Oak Hill. And beyond that road on the right-hand side would have been the Farney farm. And Iverson's brigade would have had 4 brigades trying to approach this tree line over here on the left. And to the far left of that, there at the time was a pretty substantial block wall, and the Union was there. So let me kind of start this little story.
Okay, I am in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. This is Oak Hill. And that monument there is where Iverson's brigade, consisting of 4 regiments, started off their march across this field. And they were marching towards that tree line right there. And in that tree line, unbeknownst to them, and along a rock wall to the left of that, were the Union forces. Now, Iverson's brigade had 4 regiments, and my great-grand-uncle Jefferson Hoover was in the 23rd Regiment as they marched across that field in the morning. And when they got to within about 50 yards of that rock wall, the Union Army popped up from behind the wall and from those trees and started firing. And in just a matter of a few minutes, several hundred of the Confederate forces lie dead or wounded on the field. Now that tree line that you see there, the lighter portion of it actually goes out towards the field, and then the darker portion on the right turns back to the left. So it was a flank attack there. So the Confederates were getting shot at from both sides. Now, the 23rd North Carolina, one of the 4 regiments of Iverson's brigade, started this march with 316 men. And they were in perfect parade formation. They did not have skirmishers out front looking for possible danger. So when they got to within about 80 yards of that, they were just annihilated. Now that regiment started that march that morning with 316 soldiers. And after this brief 8 to 10 minute exchange of gunfire, 286 of them did not return back to the lines. They were either killed, wounded, or taken prisoner. And my great-granduncle Jefferson Hoover was one of 49 taken prisoner.
Okay, let me stop that now. And then I had a second one taken from the observation tower, which is right there at the tree line in the rock wall. So that was the story of my great-granduncle.
There was a comment from Janet asking if you would tell us about upcoming programs from the Inland Empire.
Yeah, I'll be happy to, Janet. Let me get this. Get it up. And the event schedule in January. For the start of the year, for the first 4 months, we're going to try something different. We're going to have our regular Zoom meeting, and we're also going to have an in-person only meeting. We've got several members, legacy members of our roundtable that have a strong feeling and desire to attend an in-person meeting, but they have little or no interest in doing anything with Zoom. So in order to try to attract those people to become members again, we'll be having for the first 4 months, two meetings a month. The first one we're going to have is on Tuesday, January the 7th. And that's going to be, Tuesday, January, excuse me, let me start again. Wednesday, January the 11th. And that's going to be Captain Terry Pierce. And I think he's talking to your roundtable, isn't he? You guys? No? Okay. He's going to be talking about character and the Union victors at Gettysburg, the heart and soul of leadership. So that should be a very interesting one. And then the following week on a Wednesday, on the 18th, in person only, we're going to have a living historian, Max Harshaw, who is a Native American. He's part of the Iroquois tribe, I believe. either he is or Ely Parker was. He portrays Ely Parker. So he's going to come in and give us a presentation on Ely Parker. And he was, okay, thanks, Zach. Zach knows them all. Then on February the 1st, we're going to have Professor Neil Cheatland and talking about defending the arteries of the rebellion. And I'm still working on an in-person one for the 15th of February. I should have that nailed down in a week or so. And then in March on the 1st, we had to cancel one last year because of COVID of the speaker. Megan K. Nelson will talk about the three-cornered war, the Union, the Confederacy, and the Native people fighting for the West. So, Zach, you might have an interest in that if you don't know that one already.
I actually lifted some stuff from her book for my documentary.
Great, great. Also, going back to February for the Alliance on the 19th, which is a Sunday at 1 o'clock. We're going to have our second Alliance presentation. It's going to be Dr. Peter Carmichael from the Gettysburg College, and he'll be talking about his work, the common soldier in the Civil War, what they thought, and endured during the Civil War. So that kind of wraps up. Oh, and then on March 15th, we're going to have our own, for the in-person, Brian Cieslak will be coming in talking to us about the 69th New York, the Irish Brigade. And then on April the 5th, we're going to have, let me see, for the in-person is going to be Heather St. Clair. Janet, you know her, and she's going to be talking about the Sanitary Commission. So that should be a very interesting in-person one. She's now a member of our board, which we're happy to say. And for the presentation to Zoom in April, it's going to be Dr. Dylan Carroll will be talking about mental illness and the Civil War soldiers. So we got some interesting programs coming out. If you want to go to the Inland Empire Civil War Battlefield website, under the event schedule, you'll see them there. There's also a heading for the 2022 Civil War road trip videos. There's 42 videos there that I took. So you could probably find 2 of them that might be of interest to you, and the rest, you know, the best I could do, but I had fun doing them. So I appreciate the time to talk about all those things and turn it back to you guys.
Zach also made a comment about road trips. He said, when people do Civil War road trips, they usually mean east of the Mississippi. We in California Civil War roundtables need to make the West Coast Civil War road trip a tradition, starting with the Columbia River at the Oregon-Washington border and bending to Drum Barracks and ending at Glorieta Pass. So just a comment on that. I think that we could also add the going to Alcatraz. There's actually connection with there that it was actually a prison during the Civil War and was a fort during the Civil War. And there's also some other there's a few others that I know of, but like in Catalina, there's some areas that were connected with Drum Barracks that are there that were connected with the Civil War. There's a few others. I'm sure we could probably put together a collection. I'm sure Nick probably already has a list for us to be able to visit for those.
Well, some of them, the problem is that the locations are kind of approximate. So there was the one infamous picnic with the camels that was in the Arroyo near the Pasadena freeway, but we're guessing at which of the possible locations it was really at because the description is pretty vague. But we think it's probably one of the little park areas in South Pasadena that's right near the freeway.
Right.
Yeah, if I could make a point, when you mentioned Alcatraz, George Foxworth's Roundtable, the Sacramento Roundtable, in their newsletter almost every month, they have an article from either the Alcatraz Historical Society or the Civil War group from them, but every month there's a interesting piece in their newsletter. Another
Good.
reason to check them out.
And
Austin
Austin,
has his hand raised again.
yeah, Austin, you have your hand raised again there.
I just wanted to mention one more thing tonight, and on a more positive note than I finished it off earlier, but there, I clicked it off. There's a podcast I've been listening to lately. If you guys are interested in podcasts and listening to different things, it's on Spotify, Apple, it's on YouTube, it's all over the place. It's a couple, Darren and Mara, their names, and they have what's called the Civil War Breakfast Club. And they're Americans and they're Canadian Americans. So it's got a weird little mix there. But they, about a year ago, they started this podcast and I love it. They come out with about 1 or 2 episodes a week. It's about an hour or so. They talk about various things throughout the Civil War, like the Lost Orders, Lee's Lost Orders during the Sharpsburg campaign. Philip Kearny, they talk about the seven days battles, Robert E. Lee, George McClellan, and they bring up these campaigns, but they bring in different perspectives. They don't just totally bash McClellan or praise Lee. They bring in different perspectives of the common soldier, and they bring in a lot of humor, and they're fun. They're fun to listen to because they're not just scholar. They make it relatable. Like they talk about not just the Lost Orders and how important it was, but who lost the Lost Orders. And the years after the war, when Robert E. Lee talked about it, and everybody kind of blamed D.H. Hill, and it's kind of funny. There was a big cluster mess going on between all these former Confederate officers blaming each other for losing these orders that were wrapped around cigars and left under a tree. But the Civil War Breakfast Club is what it's called. They're really good. Like I said, they're all over. I don't know if you guys can see it, but they are a good group of people, a good couple, and they also go around the country, and that's a picture of them. They go around the country and they go to different historical sites. So they're a lot of fun to keep up with. And when they go to different sites, like they went to Gettysburg a few months ago and they did a live podcast from there, and they did like a tour, and they got in touch with Gary Edelman from the American Battlefield Trust, and they're fun to follow. So if you have some spare time, if you want to check out a nice thing to listen to when you're cleaning the house or you're out driving, Civil War Breakfast Club is a good group, is a good podcast to listen to.
Thank you. Anybody else like to share?
Nancy's holding up her
Nancy,
political hand.
I've never been able to attend the Pasadena Civil War Roundtable for years because I'm a member of another Zoom group that meets at the exact same time. So they had a buy this time, and so I was able to come to this. I've never been to your share and tell before, so I really didn't know what you were sharing and telling. So what I have is just a little thing behind me here. Oops. Turn on the light, but oops, wrong side here. These books are the photographic history of the Civil War, which belonged to my grandfather. He bought them when the book came out. His father and his wife's father and brother were both Union veterans. And my dad read the books. My dad was born in 1904. He read the books when he was a boy. And after my grandfather died, he insisted on getting the books. I never knew my grandparents because my grandmother died before I was born, and my grandfather lived in Florida and we were here in Burbank. So I only met him once. And so it was around 1952 or 3. I was 7 or thereabouts when my grandfather died, and the books were shipped to us. So I read them when I was a kid. So that's how I got interested in the Civil War. So we had 2 generations here reading the same books and the same stories and getting interested in the same thing. The other thing I would mention is, while it's not generally realized, but this book also has text. And the one on the navies, see if I can get it without knocking it over, which had suffered water damage at the time we got it, which I thought was quite appropriate, has a section on early Union Navy patrols on the Potomac River at the very beginning of the war. And I've never seen this covered in any detail in any other historical books. My grandmother's uncle was involved in one of the skirmishes there. He was a Union sailor, was grievously wounded and lost a leg. So I do not know whether my grandparents knew that this text was included in the books or not when they bought them. If they did, that might have been another reason for buying the series. So that's my little share and tell here.
Nancy, that's a wonderful set in there for that. That's actually one of the few ones that I'm aware of that they actually still reproduce that from time to time, and you can buy reproductions of that set. The more modern version of that, which we have a copy of here, is actually yours is a 10-volume set, but they've actually have the entire thing, but it's more like, how many volumes is it? Like 5 volumes, Stephanie?
There's a reprint edition that's 5 volume, and there's a reprint
Right.
edition that's 10 volume, just to be
Yeah.
difficult.
10.
Yeah, the 5-volume set does have the entire thing. It has 2 of them in each book in there for that, so it has all of the images in there for that. But yeah, it's a wonderful thing to be able to go through and to be able to see all the original images. It's also some of the ones that are in there for those images that I've only seen those images available in that particular set, that they are not available in any other area, and you can find them only in there, including a couple of Robert E. Lee that only appear in those. I don't know where the originals came from. They only appear in that set, so it's actually a very interesting set from that standpoint.
It's excellent photo reproduction too, better than
Yes.
some of the later books that you see.
Yes, absolutely, I agree. Absolutely, it's wonderful to be able to see a first edition of that.
So that's my little share and tell.
Well, thank you. That's cool, especially with the story that goes with it.
Yeah, I was
Austin.
reading this, I'm reading the ones about the battles and looking at all the big, dead pig people, and 7 years old reading this stuff. And my dad, the same thing before me, is the same age. So,
Austin, you're back again for.
If I might chime in really quick, actually at our last
October.
October was our last in-person meeting for the big book bonanza. We had a original set of the photographic history of the Civil War, the 10 volumes, and I forgot how much it sold for. Nick, do you remember how much it sold for at the meeting?
It was somewhere in the $100 and something range.
Yeah, and we got 3 of the reproductions from the 80s. If anyone's interested, that we still have. It's not like the original, but it's nice. The 5 volumes.
Right.
I'm sitting next to one stack right now, actually. It made me laugh. We were just talking about that. So, but yeah, we have a few sets if anyone is available.
Yeah, it was really funny because during COVID, we had all 3 editions given to the roundtable to use to raise money. So we had the first edition, the 5-volume reproduction, and the 10-volume reproduction were all given to us during COVID to raise money for historical preservation.
Oh.
That's why we had all 3 for sale in the October meeting.
Yeah.
It was a great running gag during the auction.
Yeah, it's a pretty set. Thank you for sharing that. The original set. It's really pretty. Yeah.
And it looks like Dr. John, you have your hand raised. So
I do. I actually wasn't going to share, but since somebody else mentioned a movie, it's I've been studying the war a lot, but this is an incident I didn't know anything about. It has to do with, it's a movie called I Heard the Bells, and it has to do with Charlie Longfellow, who's Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's son, who was in the 1st Massachusetts Cavalry, and he got wounded in a place called New Hope Church during the Mine Run campaign. And Longfellow had lost his wife and got in a fire, and he was extremely depressed. And this has to do with how he was able to recover his health. And because his son was wounded at this church and there had to do with the bell of the church, it inspired him. If you've heard, I've heard the bells from Longfellow. That's what inspired him to write this thing. and you can stream this movie. It was in theaters, but just an incident I knew nothing about. I mean, I've heard, if you know Longfellow, you know I heard the bells on Christmas Day, but that's how it came from. It has to do with his son being in the Civil War. So sort of an interesting incident in history. So just thought I'd share that with you guys. You can just Google it. You can stream it.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Miss seeing you here in Southern California. I missed seeing you at the various reenactments that you used to attend. It was always great
Well,
to
I
see you
do
at those.
miss you guys, but I will have to tell you that being here in Washington, now I reenacted Gettysburg. So it's and most of the speakers you're talking about, I know personally because like Pete Carmichael's actually a friend of mine because I get to go to Gettysburg College as CWI every year. So there are some advantages being here. You're close to the action if you're interested in the Civil War.
So basically you joined tonight to make us jealous is why you joined.
Well, I spent 2 years as president of the DC Roundtable too. So
anybody else have anything else that they would like to be able to share? So Nick, Janet, do we want to talk about what's coming up for next month?
Next month, our speaker on the fourth Tuesday of the month, I believe it's January 24th, is Meg Groeling. And Meg has spoken to us before about Elmer Ellsworth, but this time she's speaking to us about the aftermath of battle and how Civil War participants dealt with the burials and the memorialization of their loved ones and all of the things that went into that grieving process. So she has an excellent book on it. She'll be bringing the books with her. She's going to be speaking to us in person, and we're going to be very thrilled to have her. Also, the program that Inland Empire is having on January 11th with Captain Terry Pierce about the heroes of Gettysburg. He has very generously donated several signed copies of his book that will be auctioned off at our January meeting. So we encourage you to listen to Inland Empire's Zoom presentation with Captain Pierce, and then come to the meeting in Pasadena later that month and get a chance to get a signed copy of one of his books. Because Inland Empire was first to book him, we're going to move all of our promotion towards your meeting, Mike, and encourage our members to participate in your Zoom meeting on January 11th.
Thank you, Janet. It should be a good one.
Anything else for us for this evening before we wrap up?
I just want to say thank you to Dave and Stephanie for joining us again and for hosting this meeting. It certainly took the weight off of me to have to do it with a Zoom account, and we got so much better management of our meeting and our program with Dave and Stephanie handling it. And it's great to see you guys again. We miss having you in person, but we're going to be able to keep you on the Zoom list for our videos. And so I want to thank you for all the work you've done for us.
Well, I do appreciate that, Janet, and it's actually been terrific for me to be able to just see everybody again in there for that. And I hope that I don't know if you're planning on doing the December ones in person in the future, or if you want to plan on doing them just as continuous way to be able to have the larger community. But it's been great to be able to do it, and it's been nice to be able to see everyone again in there for that. I wish that I could join, and I'm sure that everybody that is unable to attend the in-person ones wishes that they could as well. But terrific to be able to share once again and to be able to see everybody. So thank you so much for your time, your participation tonight. Barry had a comment on there, and he said, a wonderful idea to be able to have the show and tell where everyone can get a chance to be able to see and hear. Many thanks to all concerned, and I want to be able to just add to that my thanks as well for everyone and their terrific shares this evening. And thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful evening and a happy new year.